We'll call the meeting to order. We could have roll call.
Mark Holden.
Present.
Ann Gatos. Here. Dave Joello.
Present.
Jose Goncalves.
Haven't heard from you.
Mandy Kilmartin. Here. Kate Kutash.
Here.
Tom Noddy.
Here.
Darlissa Ritter. Here. Kathy Yolish. Here.
Okay, if we could all please rise and salute our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, at this time I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Sensing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing. This year what we are doing is we are allowing time for public comment at both the start and end of each of our budget meetings. This is taking the place of having a separate meeting just for public comment. And the hope is that this will make it easier for people to say what they're thinking about. And the end of the meeting one is there particularly in case something that gets said tonight gets you to thinking so that you can address it before you leave. Would anybody care to address the board at this time? Would anybody care to address the board? Yes, Joan.
If you'd like to sit in that chair when you speak into the microphone.
Mark, would you have them speak their name and address?
Oh, yes. If you could please give your name and your address for the record.
Great. My name is Joan Littlefield. I live at 3 Earl Street here in Shelton. And I can't validate what I was told by one of the high school teachers, but she was terribly concerned that she was given the impression that labs for chemistry and some other hard sciences might be discontinued and having science be lecture only at the higher grades, which would, I think, undermine our whole STEM mission and looking forward to really capacitating kids to excel in science. And the lack of those labs, which might, I guess, are reasons for implementing that budgetarily. Having the lack of those labs can undermine kids' their eligibility for even not just medicine, but even other biological and chemical sciences. Yeah, even just nursing, like at UConn. So if the courses we're offering aren't getting kids the prerequisites for getting into some of these programs, then we're kind of messing them up. And I'd hate to do that.
I would hate to do that too, and I can assure you that is not the case. So,
Oh, good.
It may have been a misunderstanding on the part of that person. Now, we are looking at reorganizing some of the labs, but there will be labs. First of all, a couple things. We teach lots of kids, as you know, I know. AP courses, that's a national curriculum, they require labs.
Okay.
We have UConn courses and UB courses, they require labs. The question is, will all of the courses have labs? And the answer is mostly yes, in addition to those courses. Most of them will. It's what the design of the lab is.
Okay.
All right,
That's
but we are
awesome.
not, but it's, I have heard it too, by the way, that there will be no more labs. That's not the case.
Doing my due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Would anybody else care to address the board? Would anybody else care to address the board? Would anybody else care to address the board? Okay. Sensing none, I'll just make a quick comment. This Sunday night, lunar eclipse, okay? Prime time, well, it's educational.
It's education.
Prime time to observe it starts around 11:40 at night, and you can maybe see the moon through your window or maybe in your backyard or in your driveway. And you don't need any equipment. You can use just your eyes, or if you happen to have binoculars, that's great. And if you'd like to look through some great telescopes, Booth Memorial Astronomical Society in Booth Park in Stratford will be open, and it's free to come on down and look through our toys. Okay, moving right on.
Temperature plummets to 8 degrees.
And it's very kid-friendly, and the next day is Martin Luther King Day, so there is no school. Okay, review budget requests, and we're going to start off with the elementary principals.
So here's what I'd like to do, Mr. Chair. I've invited the elementary principals, the information technology department, and the teaching and learning department to be present tonight. They're not going to be making presentations. They're present tonight so that if you have questions, and that's how it was advertised, so that they're here tonight, and at the next meeting there'll be another group, secondary principals, et cetera, special ed, et cetera. So that if there are specific questions that come up, that way they're here. I would just like to mention that the purpose tonight is for us to talk about some forecasting of where we are likely to be headed, and to look for the board to come up with a consensus about what kind of a percentage increase we should be asking for. And so I have some suggestions in that regard. I thought we'd have some of the conversations, and then I would like to propose a percentage and see what your thoughts are on that, whether you want it to be a different percentage or not.
Okay.
Can we comment on that?
Why don't we?
I think, well, I think starting off looking at a percentage that maybe the superintendent thinks is appropriate or what we think is appropriate, I think is not developing a budget driven by what we perceive is necessary in the classroom to obtain the goals that we have set for the Board of Education and for our system.
The problem with that, though, Dave, is that what we're going to feel is the appropriate amount in terms of strictly considering educational needs is going to be at a level that is going to infuriate the mayor and the aldermen, and is likely to result in us getting a smaller allocation than if we take a look and try to sharpen our pencil first.
But if we drive the educational needs based on how those additions or subtractions get us to the goal that we have set of being in the top 25%, we will be justifying with numbers, facts, figures of how that supports that, that goal that we as a board, although we've never officially voted on it, have accepted it. And it's a lot easier to explain to somebody that if I put in a special, a math tutor in this classroom or in this grade of this school, this will help raise the test scores by a certain amount. I can justify that to the Board of Aldermen, and at least I'd have a story to tell the board. They may still say, too bad, and the mayor say, too bad, that's too much, but at least we've done our homework and we've made the budget reflect the accountability that is necessary to get us to the end result of being in the top 25%.
So I think that you stated very well, and this is part of the, what I would call the creative tension between the CEO of your school district, me, and the board of the school district, you, and it will be up to you. I have some ideas about what I think are reasonable, what's a reasonable percentage, and you may have other ideas, and that's the purpose for this kind of discussion in public session, and we should talk about it. And I think if I was asked, are the requests made by the principals, all of the principals, but specifically tonight, the principals that are here tonight, and the program directors, I think they're very reasonable and we're very well thought out, and we're not pie in the sky. On the other hand, and we can agree to disagree about this. I feel that we are operating in a community context, and to be blunt, a political context, where asking for 5, 6, 7% increase is probably not really something that is going to help us move forward towards the top 25%. If the board feels otherwise, then you will decide.
Okay. All right.
So what I shared with you kind of picks up at our from our budget workshop number 1, where the board wanted to understand, or question was, what would it cost to run the current program as it exists, as far as staffing, class sizes, program services, some of the budget challenges that we talked about this year. So the first sheet that I'm going to reference is going to be the Shelton Public Schools current service level, plus some additional requests, again, just to hopefully do a little logical progression on things that you need to consider. So the leftmost column is the 2017-2018 actual. Last budget workshop, we looked at 3 years' worth of data. Certainly that provides us some ideas where we can see some historical trends of over underspending in a particular family, and make sure that as we move forward, we can justify the basis for what we would be requesting, or what Dr. Clouet would be recommending for next year. Then we have the 18-19 approved and projected, and in the approved, you know, the amount of money that you're going to spend is actually higher. So we talk about the $72,700,000 that the city granted you. In fact, our expenditures are higher than that amount, and as we talk about, we have the offsetting revenue to get to that number. Excuse me. And then projected expenses for the remainder of this year. Most of what we talked about, so again, outgoing tuition, you'll see we budgeted a little over $3 million. We're anticipated to spend $3.5 million. So in actuality, if we just did FY18 approved, we'd see the $3,028,000. And then as we move over to the right, the 2019-2020 current service level. So what is it going to cost us next year based on what we know, both historically, where we're projected to be this year? So you'll see the $3,519,000. So that's more in line with what's projected to be spent this year versus what was actually budgeted. And then you can see the increase. So if you go to the total on that line, so current service levels, again, keep existing programs, services, make certain adjustments. Doesn't mean we carry everything forward. We had talked about that. So there are areas that we're overspending or other underspending that have been adjusted for that. But again, to have a similar type program as you do now would cost roughly $2.9 million, again, roughly about 4%, just to do existing programs and services. And we'll look at some historical trends. Things not included in the current service level. So as we explained, and as you have in your detailed budget books, you can see the additional requests for staff by your principals and your program directors. So I believe that was about 18 and a half positions that were requested. So again, you can explore the rationale behind some of those requests, and obviously, again, make decisions, or the superintendent will make some recommendations, and you can make the decision on what you do or don't want in those lines. Obviously, with staff come benefits, so that's associated with the new positions as well. A large increase in instructional materials. Again, an area that we've typically underfunded, so just when we look at software, and you'll have the detailed lines behind this, kind of working from the top down, you'll see what those requests are, and can inquire of folks. You have the software requests in your binders. As well as in that number, our textbooks. In your budget this year, $0 for textbooks, so that also includes money for textbooks as well. And then down below, equipment. This year, or 2 years ago, the city funded textbooks. So this year, they're funding equipment. So can you count on the city to fund that next year? Textbooks and workbooks, as well as equipment. Or is that something that you're going to have to make some decisions on in your budget? So again, initial projection on those requests are about another $2.2 million, so a little over 3%. So if we look at everything, again, that's been requested, obviously, again, you have a teacher's contract. That means it's going to mean, we'll look at the amounts in detail. But $1.3 million increase just following the teacher's contract. So we'll break that slightly over $5 million down and look at the individual line items. Okay. So I'm just going to go to the potential funding gap just focused on the current service level budget. So we had talked at budget workshop number 1. The city, on average, has given you 1.45%. So if we were to assume that that trend is going to continue, you get a little over $1 million. As we talked, just to continue existing programs and services, closer to $2.9 million. So right away you have a gap, a potential gap, if again historical trends were to continue, of about $1.8 million. Obviously, if you added in the requests that aren't included, I don't want to say additional requests, but the things that your principals, your program directors have identified as needs in the district, obviously that gap grows significantly. Okay. And then you have the detail, the heavier packet. Again, that shows what's been approved for 2018-2019, and then an estimate of what it would cost next year to provide the same level of service. So there are some machinations that happen in between that. So administrator salaries, so next year that's comprised of the raises that administrators are scheduled to get, as long as transferring out a director position from certified to classified salaries. So when you look at certified teachers, you can see the regular education teachers, so $1.3 million increase, offset by about $173 in turnover savings. So as people leave, we bring them in at a lower salary. So I'd be trying to see if there are any other, the noteworthy ones again are going to be in the tuition transportation. We're assuming that the agreement with the city for $3.1 million, $3,150,000, that's what's in this budget for the Durham or contractor provided transportation. Because that agreement is in place, that's what we're projecting for next year.
And that agreement came from the court
It's
decision?
It was a negotiated,
Yeah, okay.
mediated agreement
Right, okay.
between the two parties.
The problem with that is that we still don't really know what their plan is
For propane.
in terms of that. Now, the mayor is of the opinion, according to the Shelton Herald article that's online tonight, that the agreement has everything we need to know, but it really doesn't give us anything other than a price. And the fact that they do need to comply with the bid specs, but the bid specs had lots of open-ended things, which is why we needed to have interviews with them. So.
Yeah, but we've signed it, and it's, the city's gonna run the buses for the next 3 years. That's what the agreement basically says.
They still have to establish that they're capable of doing the job.
Well, all we need from them is that if they're not capable and there's any repercussions, the city's responsible. It's not our responsibility. They've taken it over. We have a contract with them, and if the state comes after us, they have to handle it. They have to defend us.
Actually, we don't have a contract.
One of the things that I have a concern about, and I'd like to know more about from in terms of the city's potential capacity to do this, is that oftentimes the city handles things in a very transactional way. How much does it cost? How much is the cost up? How much can you save? And that's fine, and there's a place for that. But that's not the only thing. And I had recently and I see Karen is here tonight, right, Karen? Yeah, thanks, hi. And Lorraine Williams couldn't be here tonight because of a previous long scheduled commitment that she had, but Karen is certainly here. And Karen, I believe, will attest that had a very heartfelt, long conversation with parents at the PTO just a few nights ago, and they expressed some concerns about the bus issue, and they were not talking about how much does it cost and how little can we expend on it. They were talking about, what they were talking about. They were talking about their children and the safety of their kids and their concerns. And I think that we would all agree that that's a concern of ours as well.
Right, you signed a letter with the mayor basically saying that the city was gonna run the system for the next 3 years.
But it wasn't a carte blanche.
Well, yeah, it is. I think it is. It's certainly, I mean, that's certainly the city's interpretation. That's maybe not ours, and maybe we have to have the judge interpret it for us, but essentially that's what it says. So, I don't know what we can do. We can't force them to give us anything. I don't think they legally have to. We've agreed, okay, you're gonna run it, you're gonna pay for it, you're gonna do everything. You're just gonna provide the service. For all we know, they could go out and contract with Durham. And let Durham
That might happen.
It might happen, you know, but it's not our problem. I mean, it is, well, Chris, and I say that flip, not to be flippant, but, you know, yes, we want to make sure that the kids get picked up, they get transported to school safely, they get home safely. That, obviously, that's what we want to do. But that is kind of implicit in the agreement, and if the city's got to comply with state regulations and with the biz specs, then that's what they've got to do. If they don't do it, then we have steps that we can take.
We'll be having an emergency meeting.
It would be an emergency.
Yeah, and part of it is the concern, because we're 9 months from when they said we want to run the buses.
Well, actually, they gotta be July 1, because they gotta do summer school and
Right, but
special ed.
no, I mean, 9 months ago, they said we want to run the buses, and we still haven't seen what their proposal is for how they're going to gear up to do it. And the concern that I have is July 5th or 6th, or whenever summer school starts, the buses don't roll, we're gonna be the ones with egg on our face.
Well,
I mean, yeah, they will too, to a degree, but we're the ones with the liability or responsibility according to the state.
and I agree with you there, Mark, and I think what we should have is a letter from the city saying, we will hold you harmless. We will make you whole. No matter what happens, if there's problems with the state, fine, whatever, we're gonna protect you. There's nothing, you know, we don't have a stick in this game. We have responsibility to the kids, but we have no leverage.
That's what the agreement says. That there will be financial.
Okay.
I would just mention that, regarding the numbers that Ed just presented, there was some discussion about the administrators' requests for textbooks, for some computers. A letter is going to be going out tomorrow, I believe, to all of the members of the Board of Aldermen, and this was at the suggestion of the Board of Aldermen President, Mr. Angles, requesting off outside of the budget process, in other words, outside of our operating budget, with backup of all of the textbooks that the principals and program directors requested. Textbooks, and then also through IT, some of the computers that we need to put in the hands of kids for next year as we move forward. That will be going out to all of the aldermen tomorrow, and all of the Board of Ed members will get a copy of that, so you'll be able to see precisely what they got.
We got it.
Sorry?
We got it.
You got it already?
Yeah.
She is so quick that
Faster than a speeding bullet.
So you've seen it then, thank you.
So the bottom line on the back of this page 23 is the difference from what we're spending this year and maintaining service at that exact same amount next year.
Correct.
Do I dare ask the percentage that equals it?
3.9.
You can see it on the summary sheet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right,
So,
I did see it there.
Just shy of 4%.
Okay, I did see it there.
And so again, I think normally we'd be a little deeper into the weeds on this, into the details, but I think just the magnitude, again, as you can see, of just what it would take to carry forward the existing programs and services, as well as the additional requests that your staff has requested, is going to mean some tough choices unless some different funding mechanism occurs. So it's just to show that gulf that exists, and I think to Chris's point, yes, this is very focused on the programs and services to students, and we looked at things like math intervention, and you'll see additional money for PSAT and SAT preparation, and so on and so forth. So those things that Chris identified at workshop number 1 as our goals, as well as the milestones, the programs, textbooks, lab equipment, music supplies. So again, this is a grassroots request. This isn't something of Chris and I and Carol and Lorraine sitting in a room saying let's up it by X%. These are based on the request of your staff at the building program level.
And the request did come, and I would agree that when we get to the point of making a formal presentation to the Board of Aldermen, we want to link our requests, whatever the board finally recommends. Academics, the requests from the principals and program directors were about academics, were about SEL, with social emotional learning, the idea of having counselors, et cetera, and also on infrastructure. There were a number of infrastructure related things that are part of the work we do. So I certainly agree with the notion that we ought to frame, when we get to that point, our budget presentation around those things. If I would ask that if you have questions that you'd like to pose directly to principals and or program directors that are here tonight, that we understand that since no questions were posed in advance, that they will do the best they can to answer the questions, but it may be the case that they have to gather some information, and we'll be happy to if that's the case.
I have a question of Ed, okay. Ed, I see where, can you tell me where I can find the amount listed for the legacy agreements that we have that are ongoing? Can you tell me where that would be?
Sure.
In what line item?
Yeah, so I actually tried to expand this, so it's in the detail, it says section 5, just because that's the part that goes in the budget book. But section 5, if you look at page 4.
Yeah, that's what I have. I see early retirement.
Yeah, so you have your early retirement.
Okay, but does that include the legacy? That early, in other
Yes.
words, people that are getting.
Yes, yeah, people that took
Okay,
the early
so
retirement.
perhaps, okay.
Yeah.
That should be clarified. And,
So you'd like legacy attached?
if it is included in there,
I
definitely.
can
We
definitely
could
do
just,
that
don't waste
for
more
you.
paper, we'll just.
Well,
write
you
it.
don't have to, we can just write it on our own copy.
No.
The other thing is, the number, the dollars for the retirement incentives, would that be under 5230, or
Yes.
that's under there as well? That's for the people that have already retired that are carrying over that amount, that
Correct.
dollar
And
amount,
how many
correct?
more years do we have on that? Just one?
No,
No, the last incentive was in 2017.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
the
it.
severance would be done in 4 years, so 17, 18, 19, 20. And the incentive would be 17, 18, and 19. So
This is
in
the-
19, we would be done with the incentive, and in 20, we would be done with the sick pay severance.
sick pay.
Okay.
Okay, and so the unused sick pay vacation time is in 52, so that's all included in that 5230 section, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes.
One thing that I noticed, and I'm not being critical, it just was interesting, that each one of the elementary school librarians, they all asked for $4,000 each in new books. What did they have a little coffee and decide that, or what's the basis?
I think that they had a meeting, yes, and they do have as a department a meeting, and they did talk about what the needs are. I want to stress that when the program directors like Library Media, which by the way I think is more crucial than ever to children in this day and age in terms of fake news and all of the things we're asking them to do, ranging from keyboarding to coding and all kinds of stuff. But regarding their meeting, they got together and they looked at what are some of the new texts and books that are out there that every child should have access to. And so the question did come up from us, well, how is it that at one school it's 4,000 and a school that's smaller it's 4,000? Well, it's because the books cost 4,000 and every child needs to have access to them. With that said, that 4,000 a relatively low number. 4,000 might sound like a lot if it was for your personal library, but not for a school library. And so they're being very reasonable. And I would say that that's the case in all of the requests, whether it's a school principal asking for things, or whether it was a program director. They came in already cognizant of the fact that we live in a particular cultural and political environment, and they did not come shooting for the moon. I have to use moonstone. But they really didn't. And so the requests they made were very thoughtful and reasonable. And they thought about, you know, Kathy, you said earlier we're here for the kids. You know, that's true, and I certainly feel that way. There are certain books and certain things that kids need to have access to.
And many of those, many of the books in the libraries are very antiquated.
Yeah.
And you even, if you look at if you take some of them out, they were probably in school when I was there. I hate to say that, but so they really do need to have access of replenishing and adding, because there's.
When
to
I
be
go,
clear, this is a nice to have, not a need to have. Is that right?
In other words, I would say that books that the kind of books they're asking for are books that reflect the planet Earth. And I don't mean that to be glib. The books are reflective of the kind of cultures, and not just cultures, but issues like global warming and no access to clean
And
water.
annual things like the Nutmeg series that come out every year that the kids want to read, things like that.
I look at our libraries on a regular basis when I'm in the schools, and quite frankly,
Checks out the science.
I always look at the science books first, but
And cats.
yeah, actually I don't look too much at the cats. That's my wife. But
Well, I know, but he looks for you one day. I just want you to know he always does.
But in any event, our school libraries, they really don't have a very large selection of books, at least compared to what I'm used to. When I grew up, the libraries in Trumbull schools were a magical place where you could go and find lots of books about almost any topic. And frankly, our selection of books is kind of thin compared to what I was used to back in those
I would
days.
just, if I could just throw in that, look, you know, our population in Shelton is increasingly diverse. The planet that we live on is very diverse, and the books that we have in our libraries ought to reflect some of that diversity, and that's an ongoing process. And several of you have mentioned earlier this evening about the issue of equity, and you frequently do, and with good reason. Well, there is an equity issue in terms of what our kids have access to compared to what kids in Monroe have access to, or kids in other districts. You know, our kids ought to get that level. They don't have to. It doesn't have to be the super platinum level, but it has to be at least a reasonable gold level where we are to provide for our kids.
I just want to be clear before I say what I'm going to say next. I am really in favor of books for kids in the libraries. All right. I, however, to be very transparent, am going to be pretty hard pressed to vote for a budget that cuts sports programs any further than what they already have. So I am looking at this in terms of where can we cut. I know 4,000 isn't much. Add it all together, it's about 20,000. I know 20,000 isn't that much. But I'm going to be looking at this line by line to see where can we cut. And frankly, $4,000 for a school is a PTO fundraiser, or it's a book drive, or there may be other ways for those libraries to get the resources they need without it being funded out of our budget, without us having to cut elsewhere.
But not everybody,
in the district.
not everybody has access to that. For example, today I was in the JA at Long Hill School, and I was in the first grade, and we were talking about neighborhoods, community, families, etc. And we were talking about computers and phones and things like that. And I was surprised that several children said, "Well, I don't have a notebook, and I don't have this." And I thought to myself, you know, that's kind of sad to think that in this day and age where of course there was one kid that had six, and he had six notebooks, and I said, well, maybe you could lend some to some of your friends in there.
And in fairness, that was first grade. And also we're talking about, you know, books are different than notebooks, right? We're talking about electronic versus paper books, and we have 2 libraries in town.
But they don't always have access to go in
I'm
there.
just putting it out there because I am going to be looking at needs versus wants, to be
No, I
totally
mean, that's why we're having this conversation. That's fair. I would say that, and I, full transparency, you were fully transparent, so I should be as well, right? I'm going to be focused on academics. I believe sports are important, but at the end of the day, our public libraries are, this is going to be shocking, underfunded, significantly underfunded. And so their collection is not the greatest. And I love the public library. I'm a patron, I'm a supporter. So I really know what books they have there because I go there and I need to see them. So they're unfunded. I think that having, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this subject, but I just think that having books that reflect modern concerns and reflect the diversity of our community and our planet are good for kids and kids of all backgrounds. I mean, kids of all backgrounds ought to read about other kids, and I know you don't disagree with that.
Oh, no, not at all.
But not all of the PTOs have equal access to fundraising capacity. They don't have equal fundraising capacity. Some schools could raise $4,000 in a night, and some schools would really struggle to do that. And then
they like to provide other programs as well with that fundraising money.
Right.
So
Sure. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right?
There
so
definitely
look at funding this budget in other ways besides what it is we have to ask the city for.
The reality is we'll probably have to cut both.
I understand that. Can I? Yeah, go ahead. No, stay on the same. Are we staying on the same subject?
Well, no, I'm about the software. Are we buying software, or is this going to be annual lease costs?
Yeah, that's a
And this
huge
is something
chunk
we're
of
building
software.
into the budget for future years. And I'm talking about PebbleGo, and because they all have these same ones in there. So are we licensing these, or are we buying the programs? Which way is it?
well,
And Dan raised his hand to answer. You don't have to answer.
okay. Well, I would just say that we are in a world where we do a little bit of both, and that most of the business model of most of these companies is to have an annual license, and so you renew the licensing. But both Vicki and Dan are here and can speak in some detail to that, and maybe they both want to just say a word about why, like PebbleGo is a good one to respond to, and some of the others. Maybe Vicki, you would like to just say a few words about that, and then maybe Dan, you can connect. Is that all right? But why is it that we have these programs, and why we feel strongly about them?
I mean, the answer is yes, Dave. Some of them are individual requests from the buildings based on some of the work that they're doing. For example, PebbleGo, that is not currently a district-funded platform that we utilize. We do have programs that run just on licenses, and some of those are tied directly to our assessments and universal screeners. Then we have programs that we pay for a flat fee for a platform. And an example for a program like that is a defined STEM, which we've done a presentation for you that we've implemented this year, and last year Newsella would be another example for that. So in some of the cases, buildings are requesting for some additional programming to meet the needs of their buildings.
And I noticed Newsella is pricey. It's being utilized system-wide adequately to justify that.
Gabby and I, there's twofold. Sometimes people make the assumption, and PebbleGo is one example because it's been a conversation we've had before. In our conversations with the sales rep at PebbleGo, it is not financially feasible for us to buy a district license. It's actually less expensive if they do it individually. So that's why this round you see it at the building levels, and that's something that we're putting through. That's number one. Number two, we're constantly looking at usage and trying to talk to our buildings to see what the feedback is, and we are doing formal feedbacks, mainly through the reading consultants and math specialists, on our usage for the programs and how it's going to fit in for curriculum. Gabby and I are currently working with the building principals and taking a look at all of our universal screening assessments and intervention programs. And we just met the other day, and we'll be presenting it first to the elementary principals next week. But we've had individual conversations. We're looking at making some cuts that may be a $10,000 to $12,000 savings as it stands, and doing some redesign that would better meet the needs of our students and staff.
Can Mrs. Yola, she's been waiting, and then we'll go to that.
Vicki, what is PebbleGo?
PebbleGo is a research-based platform.
Is it reading materials and such?
It's actually used in
It's also used in classrooms.
right. The Library Media Center primarily used it, but then classroom teachers we started to utilize it. a bit.
Andrea, your school has it, right? Because today, first grade, once again, hate to keep on saying it, but little girl, we were talking about pictures and they showed like a pilot, but it was a female pilot. Of course, the kids didn't even pick up on it. They just said, oh, it was a man dressed up with a wig and this and that. But meanwhile, one little girl said, oh, yes, like Amelia Earhart. And first grade, 6 years old. And I said, how do you know about that? And she said, on Pebble Go. So that's why I was asking if, yeah.
And if I could just direct the board's attention, because I think software is one of those areas where you will see a significant increase. So if you look under section J, right behind the staffing, you can see from the Office of Instruction that Vicki is here to represent tonight the software that the district purchases. And again, you know, section J,
In the book.
it's the first page on the back of the first page in the detail binder.
Oh, in the binder.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, right on the back of the first page. So you'll see the section J, you'll see the salary on the back of the salary page. You'll see Office of Instruction, Object Code 5614, Software Instructional. So you can see what we're purchasing because that line is up significantly. That's why we provided you the detail. As well as, and I know Dan is behind me and Chris referenced him, in section Q, on the back of the second page in that section, you can see the software that Dan's department is responsible for. And again, an area that obviously has a major impact on the budget as well.
And nothing's listed twice, right? Because if the names are starting to run, if it's in
Nothing
Dan's
should
section.
be. Some people did, and I tried to get that. So if you found one or two, let me
Okay.
know. But I did my best to screen them out.
And all of the various software are all renewals. It's not like we're doing a maiden voyage on something to try it out because we haven't got the funds.
There
We're
are a
doing
few
things-
new. Dan, did you want to address the new? I believe you had a new.
Yeah, from the technology department perspective, the one new product that I'm looking for is a district license for Seesaw, which is a digital portfolio product for students. And right now we have it at the intermediate school, and we've got a lot of positive feedback with it. But I'd like to bring it to the K-12. One of the things that we get is, so there's a free version of Seesaw, there's a paid version. The free version, after the year, all the student work is gone. The paid version follows that the digital portfolio goes all the way up to graduation. And we get emails from Seesaw with parent engagement, and there's an incredible amount of parent engagement with it. So that's the largest request that I have for next year that differs from everything else that I have.
Do you anticipate?
If I could just add, go ahead, and I wanted to add a comment to what Dan just said.
I can understand that in 5, 6, 7, as the kids are more using, but would it really be necessary in the lower grades?
So I would love to answer that. I know.
I'm hearing a lot of yeses.
I see heads going up and down.
So I was just at Mohegan the other day, seeing a presentation where I believe she's a second grader, doing a thing about being a pastry chef. Yeah, a pastry chef, right? So just as an example, so this was a little kid, very articulate, very sure of herself, doing a video production, which was part of a project. It wasn't just any random thing. She was dressed like a chef and talked about why it was she wanted to be a chef and what it was going to mean to her. That kind of thing in a portfolio over time that she can look at again when she's in 6th grade, and again when she's in high school, and again when she's applying to college, with other things in there, of course, along the way, really helps to empower student engagement and student ownership of what they're doing. Like, look at how I'm growing. Look at when I was a little peanut of a kid in 2nd grade, and now I'm in high school, and maybe they still want to be a chef or be an entrepreneur, or maybe they want to be an astronaut at that point. Whatever it is, but to have that portfolio that parents can see and they can see, it's very powerful. And again, we want students to be self-directed and engaged. This is something that really helps.
And is there no other, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there no other way, maybe Dan, you can answer this, is there no other way to download and save that information outside of a paid license?
Well, there are ways to do that, but it's not as streamlined, and you don't get as much engagement with it. What's great about Seesaw is that a student can pick up their Chromebook, they can take a picture of their work, they can take a video of their work, and then it's online and the parents can see it.
In all formats.
Right, in all formats, whereas if it was done manually, there's no way to bring it all together. So it would be in many different disparate locations that would get lost over time.
And where is it being used currently? Where's the license?
SIS.
SIS, but the free version is being used everywhere.
So it's not like it's brand new, we know it, we're not,
Right.
yeah.
Could you give us the cost difference between a license for K to 12 and a license for 7 to 12? Or just to add in the high school?
The cost per student is around $5, and then they discount it after 2,400 students to $4.50 a student per year. So you're looking at, right now I think we're at
4,800.
Yeah, we're licensed for 800 students, and so we're looking at right now, if we went the whole district, it's about $22,000 with the discount.
To do the whole district?
To do the whole district's $22,000 a year.
So where does the bulk of the $171,000 variance in software purchases come from? It's not Seesaw.
No, it's primarily, again, you've been underfunded in that line, you've added additional, it's primarily in the instructional software.
So, but this is a budget that keeps current service level, doesn't make up for past.
No, remember, I said everything in the book is what people requested. This is not current service
This is
level.
what I'm trying to get at, thank you.
We made it clear last week that these are what has been requested.
Yes.
So these may be in that line of not included in current service level.
But what's been requested, okay.
Right. But there is also, if you look at your software line this year, you are majorly overspent in that line. So I am including that in your current service level.
Where are we in current spend on that? Where are we, you said we're over.
Well, we looked at that earlier today. So if you look at the software line under instructional supplies.
I have so many sheets here, Ed, which sheet am I supposed to look at? Under
that
where?
we looked at.
Is it in this thing? Yeah.
The one that we looked at in
In
finance
Or
committee
this one,
meeting.
okay.
Finance.
Yeah.
Which pile was
In
that?
category 4, software.
Stand by.
I
Yeah.
don't have enough fingers, so.
This one?
pages I'm trying to hold.
Yes.
Okay, come here and show.
Yeah.
Okay.
203,718, is that it? Software? 5614, is that it?
Yes. Wait a minute.
There's also,
Yeah, so we're anticipating, and again, that's just the instructional.
Well, above it says software, 5614.
Right, yes, correct.
So that would be it says, 203,257.
there was also another
It's
one
got
that
it.
was in under, I think, special services or something like that. Professional and technical services, I think that was one that came into play on
Yeah.
that as well, in the 5,300 line of
Yeah,
series.
and then,
We have
So
Yeah,
software
it
in a
says
couple
in
different
this
lines
packet,
in the
and it
budget.
says that the revised budget
Well,
is
there's some things that
203,000.
overlap, too.
So it's really this 238,000 number is more accurately compared to the 203, not the 67. Am I throwing it, right?
correct.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn? Okay, this is for Dan. Dan, first of all, I want to say overall, thank you to everybody, because what you have put in this book for each of the teachers in the schools make the most sense to me that I've seen in years. So I want to thank you for that. I see things that are really kid-oriented and practical. Having been a teacher for 40 years, I can understand a lot of those things. Not everything. I reserve the right to be me. I have a few things, like, Dan, when we have the computer, the Chromebooks especially, I know the city purchased a bunch of them, and I'm wondering why you didn't break that down according to school, how many we would need, because the student population is different in each school, and I believe.
Are you in section Q?
This is general.
Oh.
Some PTAs purchased extra Chromebooks because that came up in front of us to okay. So if that could be broken down into individual schools, Dan, if that.
Are you talking the requests
for the equipment?
That's only for the one-to-one program, the request is just for parent.
Okay, but you had mentioned before at the last meeting that we needed extra Chromebooks.
Oh, this is something, yeah, I can put that,
Well,
I have that list for you, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but have it go by school,
Yeah.
reflecting X amount of students.
Although the
Do
other
you get
thing
what I'm
is,
saying? Okay.
redistricting is liable to skew some of that too.
But see, that's important information for redistricting. Because if we do have to move equipment,
That
should
equipment
move
should
with
go
that.
to the student, right?
Yeah,
Do you follow me?
but that's why the number that he develops today might be different once redistricting is done, because computers need to follow the kids.
Right, he knows what I'm talking about, okay. I also have read about shredders for each of the schools, and I'm wondering, this isn't a lot of money, however, couldn't we have like 1 or 2 days a year and have the general shredder truck come and everybody just dump their stuff in instead of every school having expensive shredders?
Our shredder in my building goes daily.
We do that, Dr. Ritter.
Okay.
We do both. There's some items, and Colin's jumping in every time. There are some items that they need to take care of at an individual school building, on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I understand
But at the
PPT
end of the year,
information.
we do take care of bulk shredding for that as a district.
Okay.
We bring the trucks and take care of that.
Okay, then that needs to be reflected in this budget,
is.
because I didn't find anywhere where the bulk shredder was listed. And if that's a price, we need to know that.
Would it be under services though, possibly?
Yes.
That's probably right.
Okay, can I just keep going? You know me. I have a
Well,
list.
can we go for a couple at a time and then go
Okay,
around?
well,
How about, how about, would it make sense to go by school, seeing as how it's by sections in the book? I
Well,
don't
it's
know
basically
what
the
kind of
same
questions
stuff.
people have, yeah.
It's the same
I
kind
don't know
of
what-
materials.
I think if you're on a
personnel.
roll, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm
No,
I'm
go ahead.
over.
All right,
Go ahead.
go for it.
All right, go for it.
It's just a thought.
Okay. I really think that the budget needs to reflect our test results. Absolutely. And are they different from school to school? And how are these supplies and materials that we're purchasing needed by schools who have more need because their test results are lower? There needs to be some kind of correlation between that, because that is important for Board of Aldermen to say, okay, this school has these specific needs because.
So let's just talk about that for a second.
Okay.
Because that is not a bad idea. That's a pretty big shift. Because we can as a school district, and you as a board can say, we want to allocate funding differently. And we want to allocate funding, we could say things, I'm not allocating this by the way, but we could say, we want to allocate funding like they do in some districts, based on family income. Because we want to allocate funding based on other socioeconomic factors like that. And one could make the argument, and maybe
Well,
you're applying the argument.
redistricting is going to make that argument for us.
Well, redistricting will just be about counting
This is gonna be.
kids. I mean, that will just be a flat,
Putting kids-
number.
Not really. It means more than that. But that's okay, another.
Well, but
subject.
let me just make, since you've raised an issue that could be misunderstood by people, redistricting will not be done on the basis of socioeconomic.
No, we're gonna balance it,
We're gonna
we're trying to balance.
It's just gonna be
Bodies.
straight.
Balance
I just don't want
bodies,
anyone to think,
balance
oh,
diversity.
We're gonna redistrict based on some kind of social.
Well, first, you
planning
can't
model.
do that. I mean, you can't do that according to the law anyways, right?
I'm not suggesting we should.
No, but I'm saying, I mean, really, we would be in violation of the law if we even contemplated such a thing, and not that we would, but.
Well, there's
But-
a difference between what's equal and what's equitable, right? So So understanding that difference, different schools have different needs based on their student population. I can't imagine what the outside would want to look at that, but it does put a whole other layer on top of everything.
In my professional experience and looking at all of the schools in Shelton, I think that it may have been the case at some point in the past that there was a vast difference in socioeconomic or demographic profile in the schools. I think it's much less so now than it was. I'm not saying that there isn't some, but it's much less so than it was.
But to follow up what Darlissa said, the requests from the principals reflect needs based on student performance. You have, some of them, they need a second English language because they have the most or whatever. So that's already built into the request.
Yes.
Yeah, you can see the schools that have requested a 0.5 math specialist, for instance, and their justification for them.
Of course, when I was in school today, this is something that I hadn't noticed before, but I went by the nurse's office and the media center and the bathrooms and all the different areas, and they were signs up in different languages.
Well, you may have read the beautiful article in the Shelton Herald, written by Andrea D'Aiuto, thank you, Andrea, about the great multicultural activities they have going on. Other schools have things as well, by the way, but that was a good look into our schools for the general public.
And to feed off of that, Andrea D'Aiuto is going to help me do an article for Shelton Life.
She didn't know that until now, though.
No, she did know that. We talked about it because I said, this is something that we need to get out there. But the other thing is, I wonder in the media, maybe Vicki would know this answer, with the media specialists ordering books, do they order books in other languages as well for the media?
So if you don't mind, I could kind of speak, because part of our budget, I know you talked about what media specialists are asking or requesting. I know for a fact that the media specialist at Long Hill, what she does is she constantly keeps what's calling a running list. So she'll keep a list of books, number one, that are in disrepair, that no matter how many times she's binded them, they can't be rebound. She also takes a list of looking at what books are always popular and checked out that she can't keep up with because multiple kids want it. That's on the wish list, she calls it. She also looks at what are new series coming out. Kids are showing general interest in this. This is something she'd like to have in the library. She collaborates with the reading consultant, with our TESOL teacher, and looks at multicultural and diversity. What other books does she need to supplement her library? So a lot of, that dollar amount that's there, a lot of it is if I pulled her running list right now of what she wants to, fulfill the library to meet the current needs of kids, that's a number based on what she's looking and seeing and talking with kids and teachers as to what are needs right now.
Vicki, are the other schools that have the ESL students, do they also have those similar signs up everywhere in the building?
Yes, quite a few of our schools, and a lot of that is they're also participating in the Project Excel work.
Okay.
So we've been working on over the last few years at increasing our multicultural books. We did a pilot with Scholastic at 2 of our elementary schools a few years ago, and the data showed that was a deficit for us as a district. So we've done a push as a district, and we put some multicultural books into the classroom a few years ago, and it's been a focus with the building administrators. So, they're looking to improve their school libraries, and they've also used additional funding that they've received out of the federal grant to improve in that area. The last thing I'm going to say about books, as opposed to many years ago, is that nowadays the publishing world is enormous. And there are so many more opportunities for writers to publish their books as opposed to just using the few major publishing houses that existed many years ago. So books that are of high quality are all over the place, and our schools are working hard to expose children to all types of books in many different topics that didn't exist. As we get deeper into the worlds of social emotional learning, that topic alone and the amount of books that are available to teachers to assist in a topic that is really important for them to lead in their schools is significant. But when you go around to our classrooms and our buildings, we don't have a lot of books to support that need in those teaching skills. So, it's really changed dramatically. It's no longer just looking only at the Caldecott book lists
Right.
and such. It's a much broader range than that. Some of the authors, and we've had them in our buildings, may be very popular on some of our social media sites or through different conferences and have very high quality literature that our buildings are trying to get into their libraries and copies.
Thank you. Chris, I think it would be, if you're doing, when you're doing a presentation, I think a picture of some of those signs just to show how our school system is changing. I mean, we have a lot of needs that we have to address, and just, I mean, I looked at the sign and I had a kind of, I was taken aback, not that, nothing wrong with it, but I was looking and I'm saying, boy, how different things are from when I was in that school,
Kathy, the district is currently 39 languages.
39.
Wouldn't it be great, Kathy, if we were also able to have a discussion about what it would be like to fund world languages at the elementary school level, so that children can learn and when they're
Bueno.
In one respect, we are actually doing that slightly by putting up
Those
signs in
right.
multiple languages. We are teaching the kids, so when they go to another country, at least they will recognize
Those
something.
signs, right?
Chris,
They
can I
will find
ask
the
you?
bathroom.
Well, that,
Very important.
going to that can be extremely important.
It is.
having had to ask in numerous languages. I think the request for additional staff is 13 and a half, 19
I think it's
and a half?
18 and a half.
Oh, I thought
18 and a half?
I thought it was 13 and a half. No?
No, that was 8.
Yeah. Chris,
Oh.
and I know that you're not gonna wanna have to do this, but you know where I'm going, I think. We gotta prioritize, and you're the person who is best capable of doing that. And as we get closer to finalizing a budget, those are the kind of decisions we're gonna have to make, separate from materials and stuff, the infrastructure part of it. But we're gonna look to you to say, okay, 1 to 18 and a half, or, and it,
I saw.
or the most with the, with the small, the most for our money kind of thing. Because maybe 3 half teachers or half people, can do more than
Absolutely.
1 full-time.
No, I understand that to be my role, and I would just like to say to that, though, that's why part of this discussion and the subsequent discussions are so important for me to hear things that are being said about what your priorities are, so I can give you my view, but I can take into consideration your view as well, and then for a final budget.
Go ahead.
I see recurring requests from the staff for the psychologists, the social workers, the guidance counselors. And we can't stress that need enough.
Is critical.
But one that's come up before, I note the computer technician, and I'd like to say that's very important. It's been filled by an intern, as is the rationale for adding it. We've got so much technology, we're going 1-to-1 at so many levels. I think that's gotta be one of the top of the list.
Speaking of 1-to-1, because that's my next question, and I assume that we're continuing, and we have talked about this, and that's, giving the kids, and they're gonna take their Chromebooks home with them.
Right.
Okay? And we've talked about, you've gotta have insurance to cover damages.
Which we have now, we do that now.
All right, and we are paying the insurance, or the parents are paying the insurance?
Parents are paying a nominal fee, and there's not been a problem.
Okay, but at some point, we're gonna get parents who can't afford a nominal
And then
fee.
we have a plan for that already.
Okay.
Yeah, we have that now, parents that can't afford it, and we make an arrangement.
Okay. How do you make the argument, or respond to the argument, that it's unfair to require some to pay and some not to pay? Just because I happen to come from a family who has an income of $100,000 and I have to pay, but this other student doesn't have to pay. And I know we've done that with pay to participate, but
It's also free and reduced lunch.
well, but the lunch is different, because that's a federally funded program,
Right.
okay? And that's different,
Well, we're not asking people to just say, oh no, I can't pay.
Well,
Have you gotten pushback from parents ever saying, well, it's not fair that I have to pay the $5 and so and so doesn't? I mean, I'd rather not solve for problems that don't exist and try and just focus on the ones that do.
I hear the question, and I think it's a perspective on what is justice. Is it justice to say, you used the term earlier, equal is not same. I'm paraphrasing, you didn't say that. But equal is not same necessarily. And so there is a lens on what's just. And I think that asking people to pay, to have some skin in the game for the computers is worthwhile. But we have to make an adjustment when someone legitimately can't afford it. And then we have to make a judgment. And
So when are those extra costs reflected in our budget so that because we're the ones, the Board of Ed is going to pay for it, so are we reflecting that in when we cost out that program?
But when you say reflecting that, you mean the funds that we have to
Put out because the family can't.
It's so minor that it's not really an issue.
Okay.
Okay,
Dan has a question.
We're self-insured. With the one-to-one program, we're experimenting with a self-insurance policy. We don't buy insurance or an extended warranty for these devices. The families pay the technology fee, and it goes into a separate repairs account.
Okay.
So the district isn't eating the costs for anybody who doesn't pay the full amount. Just that account is lower. And right now, we're tracking right on par for how much we're charging versus how much we're spending on repairs. It may have to go up a little bit. It depends on how the new tariffs play out, because prices for equipment can go up about 10% over the next year.
And this is something that we have asked the city to purchase separately.
And you see in the letter.
Right. Okay. And I think that to convince the powers that be is, we need to spell out this is how we're funding the insurance program to take care of damage and so forth. They need to see that so that they understand that we're not just being crazy about this.
And I think that's fair, and we can certainly add that to our presentation.
Actually,
I would
Ken
just say
has
that Dan and his team did some, as you would expect, they did some research about what other districts, because there are many districts that are far ahead of us in terms of one-to-one, and they did some research on what other districts do. So our plan is very much in line with what many other districts are doing.
It's not beneficial for a district to purchase insurance for devices. You end up losing money on it.
Okay.
It's easier to do a self-insurance method.
Okay.
And actually, Ken.
Dave, just SIS is one of the schools piloting the one-to-one. We have 400 students in the one-to-one program. We only had one financial request out of the 400. That could not be.
If you look at it, students ask for these devices, and it's either the family paying $300 for the device or $25 a year. And then the plan is to get replaced after 4 years. So technically, it saves the family money over the long term when the students are asking for these devices at home anyways.
Yeah, do you have statistics about repairs?
Yeah, I can get that for you.
I'm just how well the kids are taking care of it, and SIS, that's a certain age group. You get down to the lower age groups, do they treat them the same way? We have an answer in the back of the room.
At Very Hill, we only had 2 repairs.
Okay.
You see a lot more ownership of the students.
Even though the students are renting them, they have complete ownership that it's their device. They're proud.
Can we take that then a step further? Because I would assume that this is eventually going to take us down to textbooks and textbooks in the Chromebooks. And can we help to justify that by saying, as we move to this, we're going to be buying X fewer textbooks, and that money we're going to save in the long run to help cost justify it?
I think we can say that in a generic way. I think it will be harder to do what I believe you're suggesting.
It's too early right now.
That's why.
But
the business model is still in transition about what the cost will be to have a downloaded book versus a hard copy book. It is cheaper, and so we can make that argument. We can show some of that. We can show a trend that we can do.
Yeah.
But it will be hard to say over 5 years we will save $1 million.
well, I would think that you have access to the trend, and that we can demonstrate to the Board of Aldermen that, look, we're spending X amount of dollars every year for new textbooks, but that trend is going away. And if we start with the Chromebook, and it's going to take us 5 years to get every kid in the school a Chromebook anyways, by that time, we're going to have 80%, probably 80% of our textbooks will be able to download right to the Chromebook, and we're gonna save that money, and it's a savings that goes forward.
Actually, we mentioned that last year as part of our introduction of the concept of the one-to-one, and unfortunately, the aldermen they weren't ready to grasp it at that time. So maybe we need to do a better job of making the case.
I think they need to see a plan, how we're gonna do it, how we're gonna protect it, how we're doing it now, self-insured. This is this is our experience, and, you know, this is where we wanna take it. And, yeah, they may in the end say, nah, we ain't gonna do it. You're gonna get 1.5%, and that's it. And then we'll deal just like we did this year and the year before. We'll make it work, because we don't have a choice.
Let's, Darlissa.
I have, I'm gonna beat your value tonight. I just have two little things, little. Yeah. Legal fees we've been talking about for years, and that's in section S, and, you know, there are plans out there that perhaps we can get a better deal, even if it requires different attorneys, I don't know, but Kathy did some research on that, and she found several other companies, or whatever you want to call it, firms that had different plans for their retainers, and you get more out of it with a retainer. So I would like that to be considered.
Well, the board could certainly ask us to put our legal services out to bid. I would just say that it's not like buying a car. One car costs $50,000 and one costs $30,000. You say, well, $30,000 is less than $50 because it's billable hours and it's the level of expertise. And so if it takes the company that's less expensive 5 hours to do a job that the other company can do in 1 hour, then you're not actually saving money. So I mean, a lot of factors have to go into considering.
But by the same token, if you have a legal company that does, it takes them 10 hours to resolve a case, as to one that might be slightly more expensive, but it only takes them 2 hours.
Right,
then that's something.
I think that's, yes.
Okay. All right, ask your second question,
Okay,
so before
my
mine
second
goes
question
away.
is a quick little one. I've noticed a pattern from all of the school principals for ASCD membership. I belonged to that for years.
Yeah.
I know it's not a lot of money, but if you belong to that and you're a professional, you could take it off your income tax. So, hello, you know, it's a cost that.
What is it again?
ASCD, the Association of Curriculum Development. It's, of course, as you know, as someone who evidently does it, you can take off a small fraction of the cost on your income taxes. But yes, you can.
Depends on your accountant.
And I believe, and I certainly would let the administrators speak for themselves, but I think that they were looking at the idea that as professionals, they would like the district to support them in their learning. Now, this might, to Dave's point about prioritizing, that might not be something that makes the cut when we finalize. But
Just a suggestion, maybe they could share memberships or whatever.
Andrea has a comment.
Because I know that I added it. I do always pay for my own. I did add it this year. And one of the reasons why I did add it is with us being able to go out on less professional learning opportunities, because we're no longer, you know, the budget doesn't provide for us to go to paid professional learning opportunities. We're using ASCD, the resources, articles, and all of those webinars as part of our professional learning to kind of supplement what we can't do to go out of district anymore.
Well, would you have a problem sharing a membership with a partner?
I don't know if we can with username and passwords.
I was going to say, that's probably a violation of your membership.
But,
yes.
But also, as the principal of a building, by having membership, you're giving membership to the teachers in your building, so they can utilize, you know, so it is beneficial to the rest of the staff.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, Kathy.
Okay. Dan, I just wanted to ask a question on and maybe this has to do with Ken and Karen as well. For the one-to-one program for the Chromebooks, has any parent opted just to send their child in with their own, or no? No? So they're all using the ones that we're providing?
In the pilot, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But again, this is part of the pilot. There could potentially be students, as long as they fit the student's device fits the guidelines. Like a phone is not going to be their one-to-one device.
Right, I understand that. But I mean, in time, it might be that parents might say, well, maybe I'll provide my child with one, which would ease up, you know, give one to another student.
I'd like to suggest, Mr. Chair, after Skutash asks a question, that maybe I'd be allowed to, for a minute or two, to talk a little bit about a number that I'm thinking of, and then we can continue. We can stay as long as you like, but I think it would be at least appropriate to bring it up, and then you can think about it. You don't have to decide tonight. There's no pressure to decide.
It's not on the agenda.
Mine are just some quick staffing questions. Booth Hill School, the mathematics half position, that's a math coach?
A math specialist.
Math specialist.
Math specialist, a certified teacher. And then ESS, a sped position in Booth Hill School, .4 EL. Those are, I would presume, mandated by numbers, and we really can't sway away from that.
Well, I'm sure that we could answer that question differently. I believe that in the case of Booth Hill, James was very thoughtful and considered all of the needs of his students when he made his proposals. So I think they were reasonable proposals.
Right.
I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say we are mandated by law.
Okay, I know there's a certain per capita per teacher kind of thing that before in the past when we only had one ESOL teacher, we needed to add one.
Yeah, we're currently not mandated for a TESOL position.
Okay. I think those were the staffing questions I had. Other than the classroom teacher comment at Mohegan School, am I gonna presume we're just gonna take the number of elementary students and divide by a class size? On the Mohegan School, it was 14 with a comment of decrease 1 grade 2 teacher, August 2017. Will this be added for 2018? If so,
We did add the teacher this year.
Pardon me?
We did add a teacher this year to Mohegan.
So they're 15?
Yes, we did add an additional teacher.
To resolve that issue that we
resolve
thought.
Oh, so
second grade issue.
this amount right here for 2019-20 is, that I'm confused.
Well, all the numbers in any school could change.
Right.
Given decreased or increased
So
enrollment.
number of elementary
So,
teachers,
yes.
that one, that's not, we just kind of
But we
divide by,
anticipate
say, 20 per class.
The total number of students in the elementary schools is going to remain reasonably constant, although we increase some.
Reasonably.
So with the redistricting, we may be shifting teachers to different
Right.
schools, but the class size and so forth should remain
But,
constant.
you know,
Well, that remains to be seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be ideal.
Yes.
It's not scientific because it's people.
I know you want to make your comments, but can I ask 2 more questions?
Oh, okay. I had one too.
Oh, you're not done? Okay, go.
Go
No,
ahead.
you go.
But special education is one of the big driving cost factors. And we kind of talked about this, and have we or could we look at ways of, how do I want to put this to not be offensive?
Consolidate?
No, not regionalization, but be more aggressive in the hearings, because I know it's what's the term? Burden of proof. That's a huge issue across the state, and it's only going to eventually be solved by the legislature. But are there things that we
or not?
Yeah. Well, that's a decision too, isn't it?
They made that decision.
They keep making that decision. But are there things that we can look at to do our best to keep students in class, in our classes, as opposed to having to send them out?
At our next meeting, we will have a special ed department present, and they can speak to this in more detail, but I know that one of the things that I have asked them to do, and this is the answer to your question, is to make sure that we have a more focused PPT process resulting in IEPs that perhaps will be good for the kids, but also be more reasonable for us. But again, we're driven by the PPTs and ultimately the IEPs that are generated there to provide services for kids. The issue that you're raising is the outplacement. That's a little more difficult. And so one of the things that's challenging for us is when we have programs in district, which are good programs, we have many, and they're very challenging, and the principals will tell you that they're very challenging programs to have. They do require a lot of staff. So it's less, so it's hard to make, it's true, we can make the argument that, well, if we send 5 kids out at $100,000 a child, just as an example, that's $500,000, and we have programs in the schools that cost $320,000, that's a savings, but it doesn't seem like a savings to some people when they say, well, there's 3 adults in the room plus an outside specialist, but that's what we need. That's what those children need.
Also, actually, a few years ago, we had included in our budget request a proposal that would bring some of the outpost students back into the district. And the way it worked out was the cost of doing it in the district on a year-in, year-out basis was probably going to be about the same as the tuition, but we'd save a boatload of money on the transportation. But the problem that we had was the startup cost for the new program was more than we could absorb in the year. And so we talked about it in the budget process, and I forget the specifics, but it worked out where we were going to need X amount of dollars up front, and then we would end up saving about 40% of that X amount of dollars every year in perpetuity as long as the program existed.
Yes.
But it wasn't a popular idea.
Well, yeah, and you know, the Board of Aldermen talk about accountability and those types of things. And I think what you have to do in that case, Mark, is make a business argument for it. Tell them, you know, the return on investments is going to be 3 years.
We did that.
And you know, if they choose not to, then there's not much we can do. I would also suggest, Chris, that when we put together our final budget thing, we know how much special ed has increased over the last several years. We have a projection. We know what it does. I would, you know, could blow the budget, but I would put that what it's been growing, there's no reason to think it's not going to continue to grow like that, and that we should at least put that out there. You know, they can say, too bad, and because you know what ends up is what we have to do it. It's and I don't want to hear unfunded mandates. This is guaranteed by the Constitution of the state of Connecticut and by federal law that these kids are going to get educated and we're going to do it. So it's not an unfunded mandate, it's our Constitution. But that does take away what we can spend on other kids, the gifted kids, the kids that are really great in music. We can't do as much as we might like to. And it's something that the public has to also be aware of.
Interesting, Mark and I were at the Senior Center today and did a presentation for some of the folks that were visiting, and they all understood the need for special education and talked about how different it was. Now these are folks that are older than me, so just to put it in perspective.
They're my age.
And they said that they knew that in many cases there were special needs children, severely special needs children, when they were in school, in grammar school, but that they weren't in school, that they weren't anywhere, and there was no real follow through. And it really wasn't until the IDEA Act came in, and championed by people like Lee Schreiber and those folks, that there was really a push to get kids with those kinds of needs in the school, and it provoked a memory that I hadn't thought of in a long time, that my great grandparents, and they lived a long time, so I knew them, but they had a daughter who had very severe CP, so much that she couldn't walk. I mean, it was that severe. And so they had crafted for her some kind of a board with little wheels on it, so she could move around. And cognitively, she was fine, but she never went to school. And no one looked for her to go to school, and no one expected her to go to school. And that's just an example. There's lots of examples like it. I'm sure many of you can think in your network of family members of those examples. So things are different now. I was very pleased that the folks that were at the Senior Center today didn't blink. They said, yeah, it's the world that we live in, and we need to take care of all the kids.
How many people?
Small amount, 5.
Oh.
But it does show that senior citizens are not a monolithic group that all think the same way. Because I often hear people say, well, seniors won't do this, or seniors think that. No, that's just not true.
Well, that's Judson, he's got to sell it.
Yeah. All right, you're our man.
Oh, wait.
Maybe our spokesperson.
All right.
Well, speaking of the senior center, they were very well in tuned with our computers and our students because they were there presenting and they were so well aware of it. Oh, that's what's going on in your school? And they look forward to it. At least I think it's once a month that they come.
The teen tech.
The teen tech, as
They
a
go
matter of
over,
fact.
and these are teenagers that actually help and they guide and coach the older folks in how to use their own devices.
Right.
And of course,
I had a good
respect,
job there.
they're lovely kids that are, you know,
Maybe-
kind of charming.
But
Maybe
the
we need
point
to take a
is-
little bus, a mini bus tour, and have the seniors go see what's going on,
Love it.
especially in the elementary. I mean, they probably can't even imagine how.
How sophisticated it
Yeah, a
is.
six-year-old telling me about Amelia
Show them how to
Earhart.
use their
Yeah,
phone.
but we do have Grandparents' Day. We get a lot of
Yeah.
seniors.
Well,
into
that's
that.
true, we do,
Yeah.
but I mean, maybe, you know, I mean, even at the high school level, just to see what's going on at the high school and intermediate, Ferry
we
Hill.
also-
We have a lot of great things.
We also undoubtedly have some grandparents whose kids don't live in our district. So, you know, it'd be an opportunity for them to see. Chris, you had wanted to talk, so
Well,
we
I
should
just,
give
I
you a
just wanted to
chance.
mention, and then we can continue, so the night is young. But I just wanted to,
No, it's not, no, it's
We've only been
not.
here 4 hours.
Hour number 4.
Yeah, fine, okay, well, I take that back.
Speak
The
for
audience
yourself.
is- For the audience it is, but, you know, some of us did start at 4.
So, yes, so we've
started
seen,
at
and we talked about this on multiple occasions, that over the last number of years, approximately 10 years, we've received less than 50% of our ask, right?
Right.
So we can anticipate that there's not gonna be a miraculous change, and especially considering some of the possible fiscal constraints that the city might be facing, even more so. With that said, although I would love to ask for essentially what you see here on this sheet, which adds up to approximately a 7% increase, I don't think that that's something that we can legitimately do in terms of engaging politically with the appropriating authorities. So I would suggest, and this number can change, and you can bump it up or bump it down, obviously, but I would suggest that if we were to look at a 2.99% increase, that's still much more than we've received in the past, but that would be something that we might want to, if there's a consensus on the part of the board, that I would start the process with my team, meaning everyone here, to craft a presentation that would prioritize and would reduce some of the asks that we have, all of which are reasonable, to something that would fit into a 2.99%. That would be a $2.2 million.
I think, to jump in on this, one of the advantages of that is by prioritizing it, we can still mention that when we looked at what we felt the needs were, that the dollar amount was closer to the 7% range, but recognizing the importance of keeping taxes low and reasonable in Shelton, that we have prioritized things to bring it down to a more manageable level. And there is no fact, this is not a wish list, this is what we need.
So Chris,
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it, we've said it before, if we continue to get a $1 million, $1.2 million increase, we are, each year for the next 5 or 6 years, we are going to be cutting staff, people can cut administrators if they like, people can cut materials, but we are not gonna be the same school district. And we're not gonna be, and this is truly an equity question. We're not gonna be able to provide kids with what they need. And I would ask that we have a vision of what we think kids need, and we have to demand that the city appropriating authorities have a vision too. Because right now, it's not clear what that vision is, and it can't just be transactional. You know, does it cost more? Does it cost less? It can't just be that. It has to be more than that. But there has to be a vision. If we're going to take care of senior citizens, as we should, if we're going to take care of people that are sick and have needs, as we should, we also need to say children are citizens of this city and also need to be represented by the politicians. They should have equal representation. And we need to have a vision that says it's the 21st century, we want to get into the top 25% of school districts, and forward no matter what. So no matter what we get appropriated, we'll move forward. But we need to really be fair to kids. And I don't think that's propaganda. I don't think that's me standing on a soapbox. I think that's me doing my job. And I think that's what we all as part of the board of education need to do.
Chris, can I ask, would that 2.99% increase, would that be reduced if they consented to any of this, or no, that's including this?
I think it's including this.
No, because I'm looking at what Ed said as what we really need just to maintain what we have. So I'm thinking to myself then.
The advantage for the city, and they've done this for many years, and that's a way to do business, is that by virtue of doing it outside of the operating budget, it doesn't really necessarily impact the MBR, which is an issue, or the bottom line.
Right.
I know one can argue, I've heard different arguments about whether that's true or not, but in any event, I think we know, and we've heard it said, so I'm quoting city leaders, they sometimes prefer to buy things. And that's fine.
And they can have control over that and say, this is what we're doing with this amount of money.
They'll just take it out of the surplus.
The trouble with the buying things approach is that most of the work we do is based on hiring people. And most of the work we do is based on hiring teachers that are the folks that interact with the children on a daily basis, as you all know. I'm not saying anything you don't know, but that's expensive because teachers are professionals and they get paid a professional wage.
So if this workbook, if they didn't approve this, would you up that increase? Would you recommend?
I would ask you, do you think, I mean, you can up it right now. You could say 2.99 is too low, we should make it 3.5. I'm seeing some very clear facial expressions. And you don't need to decide tonight, but if you want to give me a sense that you'd like me to move in this direction, then I would appreciate that, so I can work with the team to recreate and reprioritize what we're asking for.
Moving into, if I may say,
that we don't know if we're going to cover that deficit. I don't want to be writing out my retirement check to the city of Shelton.
Well, you've heard me say we're not going to have a deficit at the end of this year.
I know, but you also have to plan for the rainy day, and what if we do? So I want in the back of your mind, when you're thinking about things to keep, this is for the Lisa comes out. Think about, do we have a rainy day fund?
We
can't.
We don't by law.
I know, but I'm just, being facetious. But there's no surplus that can come bail us out. So, think about, we're in a deficit situation. It may not change. It may get worse. We could get 5 more very needy children in. Boom.
That wipes
so
out.
We have to be very cognizant of the impact that is unknown. And
well, I agree that there's a lot of unknown and things could change, but I would say that the budget that we're asking for next year is unrelated to the deficit that we need to solve this year.
I would say that given the fact that we've averaged about 1.5% over the last 10 years, we can propose whatever percent you guys think is right, but we should prepare to have a budget increase of at most 2%. I think trying to, or we're going to find ourselves back here every week.
If the city has a vision to support kids and prepare kids to live in the 21st century, then we will be funded at that kind of level. If there is no vision, if the vision is about something else, then we have no control over it.
Mandy, are you saying that to go less than the 2.99?
I'm saying I don't think it really matters.
Well,
you can give them 7 or you can give them 1, and we're gonna get. Frankly, I think we should do the budget in reverse. They just tell us what they're gonna give us.
Well, that's what Dave said. Dave said that 2 years ago. He said, "Why don't we?" Because we spend hours, and
so you mean nothing has changed?
And right. So I think that I agree. I agree with that point because
so
that's
sorry
what
to
Dave
be
said.
cynical, but
if we don't justify, though, things that we feel are needed that are going to cost more than we have, they're going to give us a level budget.
I agree, and I like the point about making sure that we say, in reality, really what we need is 7%. But in good conscience and as good stewards of the city, we have been able. We're really trimming down to get to try and stay below 3%. And here's what we really need. I like that approach. Well, it's I have no reason to think, hope, but
I'd like to suggest, Mark, that we wrap up. We ask for comments from the audience, and as far as giving Chris direction, I don't know, I hate to say it, I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference, but you can work with 3%. We've kind of talked things out. You've heard us, Chris, and I think whatever judgment you come up with is the number. And, you know, again, I'll go back to the thing is when we present it to whatever we throw out there, there's going to be all kind of stuff written. You know, the papers here tonight, you know, they're going to write about it. It's how we present it to the Board of Aldermen, and every increase that we ask for let's say an additional person, we justify how that gets us to the end point, how that brings us up to the top 25%, how that addresses the social and emotional needs of our students, you know, and we talked about, Kate mentioned the psychologists, you know. We know that when there's an issue at a school, it takes away from the teacher and it takes away from the principal, and it's all time taken away from learning. Right. And an additional psychologist helps to prevent that and puts the teacher back in the classroom. So that's the positive side of it, plus the emotional side of it to the other kids and the student that's involved. And you know, same thing with the infrastructure. I think, you know, we give them a whole list of stuff. You want to buy stuff for us? This is all the stuff we need, all the computers we need. I saw somebody's requesting 3 desks. One of the schools had 3 desks. You know, this is what chairs, cafeteria tables, and again, if people are getting hurt because they're moving the cafeteria tables, and we have comp claims, then lay it out there. Look, we need 25 new tables, and because we've had 4 accidents and it's cost us this in workers' comp. If we solve the problem is to replace the tables, and then they don't get hurt. Those are the kind of things. And if the Board of Aldermen said nada, then nada it is, and they can explain that to the parents.
I would just piggyback on exactly that and just sort of distill it down a little bit. In business, when we put together a strategic plan, what we typically have is a goal, the strategy on how to get to that goal, and then the tactics that make up those different strategies. And so to Dave's point, if we can sort of format it in that way so that it all fits together nicely, it might
The other thing to bear in mind, though, is when we do our presentation to the aldermen and A&T is we do have somewhat limited time, and so it's going to be important to be able to turn as much of this as possible into a written narrative that we hope they will read.
Well, I would only ask that, and I will ask directly to members of the Board of Aldermen, but I would appreciate all of your support in this. If before we do our presentation, they will have received our budget information, and rather than wait until the night of the presentation to ask questions, spring questions on us, why not ask us in advance? Say, hey, we're really interested. We don't know what that means. We'd like a better explanation. Fine, and then we can provide it, as opposed to some kind of a performance of asking questions and
it's all kabuki theater.
Right. The other thing, just as a quick reminder, a few years ago we had a budget request, and I don't remember the exact amount, but it was in the range of 6%, I think. And the mayor and the aldermen were furious that we would dare to ask for so much money. And frankly, everything that was in there was something that the board felt was a reasonable need to meet what our students would require to be successful in the future. And we got criticized very severely for that, and I believe that hurt us in terms of what we got that year from the city.
Again, it's about vision, and it's about what the vision that the city has for the children that live here, and it has to be about more than just mill rate and transactional notions of what
Chris, I think you also have to keep in mind all the work we've been doing on the strategic team, because if we're talking about the vision of the graduate, our concept of the vision of a graduate, you need the supplies, we need the computers, we need the books. So again, that means all the work that we're doing. Vicki, you could speak to that too. I don't think all the board members have seen what went on in the strategic team and all the presentations. but there was a lot of work put in, and the whole team, all the administrators. So, first of all, how could you take away all those supplies that we need in order to meet those pathways that are expressed in the vision of a graduate, profile of a graduate? So again, you'll have to keep that in mind.
But the, speaking as if, you know, what I hear from the aldermen is, we've done all this from their standpoint in a vacuum, because they haven't participated, they haven't had input, and now we're thrusting it on them.
And they've been invited
Our meetings
to
are as open
I
for them
understand.
as theirs is for us, and I've never seen them here.
I understand.
And I've
but that's
questioned
their
that
response.
every
They
year.
respond, that's how they respond. You know, you.
But Tom brings up a good point. These are public meetings.
Oh, I know.
And there have been very explicit invitations made to meet with members of the Board of Aldermen.
And if they're that concerned, then they should be here listening to us and listening to the staff and to the public.
And our
Not
meetings.
reading it by some newspaper.
And we're on Facebook Live, and we'll be in a few days on YouTube with this meeting. So they can watch the meetings either in real time or after the fact if they're so inclined. I think at this point it probably does make sense to wrap up for the evening, other than allowing anybody from the public who'd like to speak. Paul. And if you would give your name and address.
Okay, my name's Paul Littlefield, and I'm at 3 Earl Street, Huntington District. You're not the only people in town who believe that kids are our future, and I don't have any kids of my own, but I still believe it myself. And I'm hearing a lot of anger on the part of the populace, so I think things are, let's hope, about to change. I'm going to do my part to make sure that they start to change. But I got a couple of concerns from what I've heard here at the meeting. First one is, I don't think that the dysfunction of the aldermen is your responsibility. I think you need to ask for what you need and get the message out to the public. So that means the 3.98% at least, preferably the 7% figure, because you're not going to get what you need if you start low ball and then they ask you to come down. But you need to ask at least enough so that you can come down a little bit. Secondly, it just went right out of my head. Oh yes, academics over sports. I had the fortune of growing up in a school district that was pretty good. It had its faults and its problems, but the academic preparation was pretty decent, and it fit me for my subsequent life in the world. Sports is lovely and it gets a lot of enthusiasm, but what our job is as a school system is to prepare the kids academically. And by that I mean not just the genius level kids who need extra in one way, but also the kids at the other level, the vocational level. They also need support for what they're going to go out and do. The society actually happens to need a lot of tradespeople these days, and it wouldn't hurt to have that as part of the curriculum. But I know, I'm just saying, but I think that that part is essential over extracurricular activities. As much as I loved choir, I would count that as an extracurricular activity. As much as I loved band, I would consider it extracurricular, but I do not consider languages extracurricular. Those are the future. If you don't have a strong foreign language program, kids are going to be suffering in the years to come, because there's going to be much more need. People are much more international, and there's going to be a lot of need for that. So I would say if you have to prioritize the classroom over the sports field, simply because that's where the kids need the preparation the most. The sports is a lovely thing. The chess club is a lovely thing. You know, the debating society I enjoyed a lot, but you know, as much as I enjoyed the extracurricular activities that my school offered, it was the academic preparation that has stood me in good stead. So, thanks.
Would anybody else care to address the board? Would anybody else care to address the board?
Chris would like to address
yes.
the board.
I'd just like to say one thing. This is Ed's final meeting with us.
He's so happy. Look at that smile on his face.
He's worked, I just want to say he's worked very hard. I appreciate his work, and I'd ask you all to join me in a round of applause.
Ed, as I remember, you didn't have any gray hair when you started.
Looking
in the mirror.
Ed has really worked very hard for us, and even after his decision to leave the district, he continued to work on things like improving the quality of reports that he prepared for us, and he's been a professional in every way, and I wish you much success in your new career. And fortunately, we have somebody else great who's coming on board, so we won't be stuck. So, you know.
Truly, thank you. I know you all serve for the needs of the kids, and that's what it's all about. And you've got some challenges ahead of you, or some would phrase it, opportunities. But the work that you've done and the involved, I've never seen a board more involved in the schools and seeing what's happening in the schools. So kudos to all of you, and I wish you continued success.
You wish us a lot of luck is what you really wish.
All righty. One final thing. People had asked for a copy of the comparison of central office administrative positions to include the size of the student body in each of the districts, and that is one of the things that we have. So, okay. With that, the only thing left on our agenda is to adjourn. And a quick reminder, lunar eclipse this Sunday.